Welcome to Midlife Madness. I'm Michelle, your host, and your partner in general foolishness. I'm glad you're with me, and I hope you'll stick around. When I was a little girl, I thought my life would be settled or in order by the time I was 26 years old. I dreamed of growing up and getting married and having a house full of kids. I wanted to be a mom, just like my mom. And a great deal of my upbringing was specifically designed to train me for motherhood and my stereotypical duties as a wife. But unlike any other fairy tale, that didn't happen. Because of that, I found myself frequently asking, who am I? Why am I here? And what am I supposed to be doing? On my journey of discovery, what I found was that the answers frequently changed. In fact, I think every decade of my life would have some different set of responses. But while I was searching for those answers, I had a real good time. I think that quote is really valid because we spend so much time trying to figure out who we are that we kind of fall into the expectations or the perceptions of other people relatively easily. And I know you guys have heard people say this before, that when you hear something enough or you experience something enough, you start to believe it. And then a good chunk of your life becomes undoing all of the things that you learned that weren't actually true about yourself. So, to some degree, I think figuring out who you are and who you're supposed to be or what you are supposed to be doing really is about unbecoming all of the things that you weren't really meant to be. Now, my life didn't come together as expected. It was not working as planned, right? But if I had stopped or given up at 26, if I had thrown in the towel, I would have missed some of the best moments of my life. I think about how so much of my life happened after that, after 26. I think I was 28 the first time that I ever sang the national anthem for the St. Louis Blues. That led to season after season after season of singing multiple times or multiple games for them. And that opened the door for me to sing for a lot of other events as well. You know, over the course of 30 years, I sang for the NHL and Major League Baseball and Minor League Baseball and the NHRA, NASCAR, professional bull riding, literally anything that you can think of, indoor and outdoor Major League Soccer. I've probably sung for it. I've probably sung the national anthem. And some of those experiences really did help me figure out a little more about who I was, what I was passionate about, what kind of things really motivated me. I loved being in those environments. And while I understood that once I finished singing the national anthem, people weren't necessarily applauding for me, they were applauding because it was over and the game was starting. But I enjoyed it. I loved being in those spaces. I think the main reason was not because I was in the spotlight, because that does, to a degree, make me uncomfortable, but it allowed me to meet people that I would have never otherwise met. I remember one time I was singing for the PBR, Professional Bull Riding, and I was singing in St. Louis, and it was probably one of the coolest experiences I've ever had, but it was also one of the most terrifying. First of all, if you've never seen professional bull riding, you should, because it is pure entertainment. It is a spectacle. The way that they introduce the bull riders and the way that they start the entire event is incredible. There's pyrotechnics and all kinds of stuff that goes on. So right before you sing, you walk out onto the dirt to sing. And so right before you sing, the whole place goes dark. And I remember this older gentleman approached me. He was a cowboy. And he took my arm and he was like, I'm going to escort you out to the center where you will be standing. And when it's time for you to sing, then I will step away and you'll do your job. I was like, great. So we're walking out there, and it's not easy to walk in that dirt. It's not something that I do on a daily basis. So it was a little bit of a struggle. And I'm holding on for dear life to this man who I'd never met before. And I hear some rattling. It sounded like metal on metal, right? Nearby. And he leaned down and he said, "Don't worry, ma'am. I'm going to make sure that you're all right. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." And I thought, what could potentially happen to me? And I hear the rattling again. And I realize after a quick conversation that the bulls are behind a curtain that is right behind me. And I was shaking like a leaf. But in that moment, all of a sudden, the lights came on and the fire lit up around the arena, and the bull riders were elevated on a stage behind me. It was one of the most incredible shows that I've ever seen. And immediately, I felt fortunate to be a part of that. It was so exciting and interesting, and it was a new experience. And it just kind of like activated my desire or my motivation to keep doing that. So I think like that's one example of how if I had just thought, you know what, this isn't it, things aren't going the way that I want them to go, I would have never had those experiences. I would have never had the opportunity to travel across the country and sing at different events and meet all of the people and rub elbows with some famous folks. And I loved it. I loved that experience. It's just one example of how my life kind of happened after I thought it would, after I thought it would be sort of complete, if that makes sense. And I think about too, that it was after I turned 30 that my career like really took off. I started my working life as a sports writer. I was a sports writer for about 6 years. I started when I was in college, and then I continued. I did like little feature stories for small papers and things like that. But it was great, and I loved it. But at that time, especially that era of life, there weren't a lot of opportunities for women in particular. So I knew that it wasn't going to be something that would be sustainable for me or something that I could keep up. I just remember seeing Gail Gardner on ESPN and thinking like, I want to do her job. I really want to do her job. And that didn't happen. It didn't work out. And so I had to transition and figure out what was next. And that required a little reinvention. One of the things that I discovered was that when life didn't occur the way that I wanted it to, or things didn't work out the way that I wanted it to, I had to do a little work to reinvent or to recreate opportunities for myself that would lead to some semblance of joy and happiness, right? Not be a consolation prize for what I thought I initially wanted, but to make things happen so that I could enjoy my life. And that's exactly what I did. So after the sports writing thing kind of fizzled out, I fell into the advertising industry. And I spent about 16 and a half years in the advertising industry working on commercials and radio spots and print ads, billboards, documentaries, anything that you can think of, I've worked on it. But I started as a traffic manager. That meant that I didn't actually get to work on the stuff. I had to send it to the different outlets, the different media outlets. And I had to understand what the requirements were, and I had to meet deadlines, and I do all those things. But it was the beginning of a career that I ended up loving. And it was also the path that helped me uncover maybe a little bit of like why I'm here, right? I found out that as a traffic manager and then eventually a project manager, part of my role and part of my job was to help put people in a position to be successful. And I liked that. I liked that a lot. I had always been an athlete. I started playing sports when I was 8. I played volleyball all the way through college. I played basketball through my sophomore year of college. And by played basketball, I mean I did some of my best work on the bench. But I was on the team, so that's all that matters, right? And I think because of growing up in an environment where that was very sports oriented, I learned quickly that team was very important and that you weren't going to win if you didn't work together, if there wasn't some sort of chemistry. So when I entered the advertising industry, I loved the sense of team that was in every one of those environments. I loved how people would come together to develop solutions or to create a plan that would meet the needs of a client. The extensive number of hours sometimes that would be spent. I remember at the very first agency where I worked, we were pitching new business. We were trying to get business from a coffee company. I don't remember what the coffee company was. But I do remember that it was an all hands on deck situation. Everybody was coming up, each creative team was coming up with their own ideas, and everybody was kind of pitching in. And the team that came up with the idea we were going to sell to the coffee company, they decided that they wanted to pitch this presentation in a coffee table book. Pretty brilliant, right? Not only did they want to do that, but they wanted to deliver it on a coffee table with the coffee and a coffee mug. And so I don't really remember all of the details about how we gathered all of those materials. I do know that I was responsible for getting those books bound, for finding a binder that could bind those books for them. And then overnight, one of the administrative assistants at the agency, she and her husband got in a truck and drove hours overnight to deliver this coffee table with the coffee table book with all of the business that we were pitching inside it to the coffee company. They drove all the way there and delivered it in person. Now, we didn't get the business, which that sucks, but that happens a lot in the advertising industry. The good part of it was all of the camaraderie and the experience and just the abundance of creativity that occurred in that space. And I knew in that moment, this is what I want to do. I want to be a part of a team forever. That's it. No matter what it is, I want to be a part of a team. And I want to contribute in a way that is going to help put other people in a position to be successful. What if I had stopped at 26? What if I had decided I'm not going to go back and finish my degree? And I should say this too. I got kicked out of college when I was like 9 credits away from graduating. I got kicked out because I partied too much and I had too much fun and I really didn't care about school. I was never a really great student, which we can talk about later. But I had to go back. I had to make the decision to go back at 26 years old to finish school and to get my degree at 27. It took 7 years of school for me to complete my degree. But what if I had quit? What if at 26 I was like, nah, I'm just going to babysit these kids and whatever. Not that being a nanny is a terrible job, because for some it's a calling. It's a wonderful job. But for me, it was not. You know, someone who was easily bored and quickly frustrated, I needed more than that. I needed different than that. And so falling into the advertising industry really helped me discover what was the thing that I loved the most. And I think it was being on a team and putting people in a position to be successful, collaborating and working together with others. I wasn't always great at it, but it was a desire, and being in the advertising industry connected me to that. And as time went on in the advertising industry also, it opened the door of more possibilities for me. The travel that I did. I had offices in cities outside of my hometown. And I got to work with a lot of people, cameramen and writers and directors, actors, people that I would have never come in contact with. It was a great learning experience, which always prepared me for whatever came next. I met some of the most incredible, most creative people I've ever met in my life in the advertising industry. I'm eternally grateful for the experience and for being allowed to participate in those situations. Again, not something that happened until after I was 30 years old. And it was incredible. It had an incredible impact on my life. In fact, it's what prepared me for the next step, right? I left the advertising industry not willingly in 2013 or 2014. Either way, I was fired. And that's a long story that we'll get into later. You get fired in the ad industry a lot, but I was fired from this job. But what they didn't know was that I had just graduated. It was 2014, because what they didn't know was I had just graduated in 2013 with my master's in education. I had decided to go back to school and become a teacher. I thought, what better way to put people in a position to be successful than to work in education? And honestly, there was like a part of me, like a nagging part of me, that always felt like I should have been doing that anyway. So I did. And when I got fired, I jumped into the next role. And I was very much prepared for that. Well, I thought I was. Between school and all of the experiences that I had in the advertising industry, I thought, I'm ready. I'm ready for education. I wasn't. We'll talk about that in another episode. But it did help me understand the importance of relationships. Being in advertising was all about developing relationships, whether it was with your team or with your clients or with the people with whom you worked on every single project. Relationships were critical. And being an educator, relationships were critical. You cannot be a successful educator without relationships. So it was all connected. Thank God I didn't give up after 26, because so much of my life, so many of the good things in my life, and so much of the growth and development and experiences that I had happened pretty much after 28, after 30, right? I spent nearly every moment of every day considering like how I could do it better. And then I made it happen. So who am I now? Now that I'm over 50, I have to reconsider the answer to the question. I really liked an interview that I saw with Jane Fonda. She was on a podcast with Julia Louis-Dreyfus called Wiser Than Me. It's an amazing podcast, especially if you're a woman over 50. You need to watch it or listen to it. Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Jane Fonda were talking about how life happens in acts and how we have 3 acts to our life. That first act is really like all the way through maybe our 20s, right? And then like after 30 is our second act. When we get to 50 and 60, we're entering the third act, specifically 60, but like I'm on my way, right? We're entering the third act of our life. And I think about like, what is the third act going to mean for me? What do I want to accomplish? What's the legacy that I want to leave in my third act? Being mindful, of course, that every day isn't promised, right? How much time do I have? Have I lived the majority of my years already? I hope not. I'm hoping for at least like another 50. I want to be 104. My nephew told me once when he was 6 that I could live in his attic when I was old, and I want to hold him to that. So we're hoping for another 50 years. But what if? What if not? What if that doesn't happen? Again, life doesn't always work out as planned. I have had to reinvent myself multiple times, whether it was in my career or in my relationships or how I saw myself. That constant reinvention and that constant reconsidering the answer to the questions, who am I? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? That's been a recurring theme in my life. And I think it should be. I think it should be for all of us. So Jane Fonda talked about how in her third act, she had all of these plans, and it was so inspiring to me. I thought, she's not quitting. She's not quitting. And she's in her 80s. So how much more is there? How much more could there possibly be? I promise you that whether you're just trying to make it to 18 or you just want to get through your 20s because they're hard, and they really are, or you want to survive your 30s because it seems like the most stressful time of life. So I think about what Jane Fonda said and the answers to the questions, who am I and what am I supposed to be doing and why am I here? The good news is that I've demonstrated time and time again that reinvention is possible. We all have the power to reinvent ourselves. It's not always easy, but you're not on anybody's timeline but your own. The fact of the matter is that according to Psychology Today, people who ask the question, who am I, are generally very kind. But also, listen to this. The truth is that we are not one person, but many people in one. In fact, the most accurate way to think of ourselves is that we exist as a broad set of potentialities, rather than as a narrow set of traits. That means we're meant to reinvent ourselves. We're not just that one person. We're whoever we want to be. So I think in order to get some semblance of an answer, we have to really ask ourselves some serious questions. They have to go beyond the basic likes or simple desires. Because if I focused on my basic likes and simple desires, it would be things like I love a Diet Dr. Pepper, especially when it's really cold and crisp right out of the fridge. I'm a big fan of dogs. I probably like dogs more than I like a lot of people. In fact, when I go for a walk, I will say hello to dogs and ignore the people who are walking them. That's just who I am. I love sitting on the couch and watching a baseball game with my dad. I will cancel plans just to hang out with my dad. He's 86 years old, and I will spend time with him because I like to and I want to. I love a good steak. Can't stay away from chocolate cake. If there's chocolate in the house, it's mine. Speaking of things in the house that are mine, don't leave your leftovers in my refrigerator because I love good leftovers. I like a road trip. I like an ice cold beer on a hot day, just like my mom used to. I love to garden. And there's also something that's occurred in the last 5 years that has caused me to like to watch the birds in my yard. So now I have bird feeders. Those are the things I like. I love my friends. I love to travel. I love to go out to eat and enjoy others' company. I love a good show. I love binge watching certain shows on various streaming services. I like my quiet time, but I also love a crowd. Those are the basics, right? Try to lead with love. Leading with love, that would be a little deeper. You go beyond the things that you love. You dig a little deeper and you consider your values. What guides your decision making? For me, it's the relationships in my life. I'm very much in touch with what is going to be the best solution or the best decision for everyone? And how can I lead with love in a way that is going to create the best outcome for everyone? So what guides your decision making? Or what do I really believe? What do I really believe about love and life? What do I really believe about politics? What do I really believe about people who believe things differently than me? What do I really believe about acceptance and embracing others wholly and completely for who they are? What do I really believe about understanding that everybody brings something to the table? And being trauma informed is not a checklist, but it's about who we are and how we accept others, how we embrace people. Or how do I approach my life? Those are questions we need to ask. How do I approach relationships? And how does my past hinder or help? How does that relationship trauma carry with me into space today? And how do I deal with my stuff? Am I dealing with my stuff? All of those deeper questions help us discover who we are, why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing. We have to think about what motivates us and where our passion lies. What are my strengths? Where can I be better? What's the legacy that I hope to leave after this final chapter? And what am I afraid of? Right now, I'm afraid of hot flashes that come in clusters. I'm afraid of the weight that I've gained around my midsection. I'm afraid that I cannot sleep at night and I have random heart palpitations and all the other crap that comes with this age. It's funny because my mom used to call it the change of life. And I think, how hard can this be? I have changed my life repeatedly. I'm also afraid that I may never meet a man who can handle all this fire and spice and emotion. I really don't want to wrap up this third chapter of my life alone. And most of all, how am I getting in my own way when it comes to the challenges that come with another change of life? Whatever it is, I know, because I've seen time and time again, when life doesn't show up the way that you anticipate that it will, you just can't quit. You got to keep moving. Now available on Amazon, You Matter and Other Things I Want Kids to Know, the You Matter Coloring Book, and Inspiration for Teachers by Chicken Soup for the Soul. We talked about a lot today, but I think as we wrap up, I want you to start to think about the questions for yourself. Not just who am I, or why am I here, or what am I supposed to be doing, but what are the things that drive you? What is your motivation? Where does your passion lie? And I want you to write it down. I want you to think about it this week. What are 3 things that really, really make me excited, that bring me joy, that make me happy? And how do I integrate that into my everyday life? All right, I'm out of here. I will see you next time on Midlife Madness.